My name is Evelyn Cross. I am 57 years old. This morning, a 32-year-old woman in a yellow blazer sat in her late father's leather chair and told me, in front of every senior executive in the company, that security would escort me out within 5 minutes. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I reached into my pocket, placed a brass keyring on the table, and watched it slide slowly across the polished wood until it touched her fingernails. What happened in the next 60 seconds emptied the color from the face of every lawyer in that room. Because the new CEO of Vance Biotech had just fired the woman who owned the land the building was sitting on. Before I tell you what happened next, please hit like and subscribe. Drop your city and local time below. I love knowing where you're listening from. Now let me take you back 26 years to a laboratory that smelled like chemical reagent and burnt coffee when a man said something to me I didn't fully understand until this morning. I was 31 years old when Vance Biotech was about to collapse. The research campus smelled like reagent and the particular mustiness of a building that had been built fast and maintained slowly. The fluorescent lights in the main corridor flickered in cold weather. The floors were poured concrete, painted gray, scuffed at every doorway from years of equipment being moved in and out at all hours. I had worked there for 2 years as a research associate. I knew every hallway, every laboratory layout, every locked room, and what it held. The founder, Richard Vance, was not a warm man in the conventional sense. He was precise, demanding. He forgot birthdays and remembered datasets. But he had built something real, a research campus that was quietly producing work that mattered, and in isang libot siyam na raan siyam na put walo, it was 3 months from bankruptcy. I inherited my family's estate that spring, 40 acres. A property my grandmother had held since before I was born. Richard called me into his office one evening when the lights in the rest of the building had already gone off. The room smelled like cold coffee and printer paper. "I need the land," he said, "not a request, a statement." I told him I would give him a 99-year lease. My conditions were simple. I would remain an employee, anonymous, uncredited, unremarkable on paper. And I would remain the sole custodian of the campus master keys. He looked at me for a long moment. Then he said something I wrote down when I got home. "You're giving away leverage most people would spend their whole life trying to build." I said I wasn't giving it away. I was placing it somewhere it would be safe until it was needed. I was 31. I thought I was protecting the research. I was also protecting myself, in a way I wouldn't fully understand for another 26 years. Richard's daughter Victoria grew up watching her father run a company she was told she would one day inherit. She visited the campus at holidays. She walked past me in the corridors the way people walk past furniture. Not unkindly, just without seeing. I sensed it early. The way she spoke about the staff, the word legacy used in place of the word people. I filed it away. I kept my keys in my pocket. I kept showing up. Richard Vance died 14 months ago. At the small reception held in the campus atrium after the memorial, I stood near the back and watched his daughter move through the room with the particular efficiency of someone who had been waiting a long time for this moment. She spoke warmly to the institutional investors. She was photographed with the board members. She thanked the senior executives by name. She did not speak to me. 3 weeks later, I overheard her in the corridor outside the boardroom, speaking to her assistant. "The legacy staff, the ones who've been here since the beginning, start clearing them out after the inauguration. We need people who understand where this company is going, not where it came from." Legacy staff. That's the word they use for everything that used to be dedication, legacy, overhead, restructuring. As if 25 years of someone's life were simply a line item to be removed in the name of efficiency. I said nothing. I walked back to my office, sat at my desk, and opened the original lease agreement I had kept in a locked drawer for 26 years. I read it from the beginning. Then I called Arthur Pendleton, the company's chief legal counsel, a man who had been present the day Richard and I signed the original documents, and I asked him one question. Is the clause still in the original charter? A pause. Yes, he said. Every word. I understood something in that moment. For 26 years, I had been invisible to this company's leadership. Present, essential, unseen. I decided to remain exactly that, until the morning of the inauguration. I made sure my keys were polished. I made sure the brass was clean. I went home and I waited. The boardroom that morning smelled like fresh flowers and ambition. Victoria sat in her father's chair wearing a yellow blazer. Around her, senior executives in tailored suits arranged themselves in the particular posture of people who had already decided which way the wind was blowing. I stood at the far end of the mahogany table in my faded denim jacket, holding a leather folder against my chest. Arthur sat beside Victoria. He had not yet been told what was coming. But I could see, from the way he occasionally glanced at me, that he suspected. Victoria's speech was brief and confident. Words like vision, modernization, the next chapter. She talked about legacy, the word she used for everything her father had built that she intended to replace. Then she looked at me. Hand over all company property immediately, she said. Security will escort you out within 5 minutes. She gestured toward 2 guards by the double doors. She didn't look at the severance paperwork. She didn't ask my name. Have you ever held something quietly for a very long time, waiting for exactly the right moment to set it down? Tell me in the comments. I read them. I reached into my pocket. I placed the brass key ring on the table. I watched it slide across the polished wood. 3 master keys, uniquely stamped, irreplaceable, each one operating a different section of the entire research campus. They slid until they touched her fingernails. Arthur looked at the keys, then at me. Every bit of color left his face. He stood. His hands were shaking as he opened the founding charter, pulled from the vault that morning for Victoria's inauguration. Present in the room by coincidence, or perhaps not, he read the clause aloud. The land lease, the custodian condition, the termination clause. Victoria frowned at him like he had lost his mind. Then the words settled. If the custodian of the keys was ever terminated or forced off the property without just cause, the land lease would instantly terminate, and all structures built upon it would revert to the landowner. She had just fired the woman who owned the ground the building was standing on, and across the campus, even as the boardroom erupted, I knew that my security team had already been contacted. The front gates were being secured. No corporate assets would leave my property. Victoria would understand that in about 4 minutes. Arthur looked at me across the chaos of the room. I had called him 2 weeks earlier, not to warn him, but to ask him to pull the founding charter for the inauguration. I told him it seemed appropriate to have the original documents present for a moment of transition. He had understood what I was telling him. He had pulled the charter. He had said nothing to Victoria. There's nothing she can do, he said quietly, standing beside me while executives shouted into their phones around us. The clause is ironclad. Richard made sure of that. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button, because this is where it turns. Victoria crossed the room toward me, her voice dropping into the particular register of someone offering things they assumed I wanted. Triple salary, executive vice president title, unlimited stock options. I looked at her for a long moment. I'll think about it, I said. Then I turned toward the door. In the atrium below, the staff had gathered. Scientists, technicians, administrative workers, people I had known for decades, people whose healthcare funds I had quietly supplemented, whose children's scholarships I had anonymously funded, whose research departments I had protected from budget cuts for 25 years. When they saw me come through the doors, they applauded. I wish this were different. I wish Richard had built a company where this clause never needed to exist. I wish Victoria had walked into that boardroom and seen the people who had built what she was inheriting. But wishes don't hold up in a boardroom. Land lease contracts do. That evening I sat in my cottage with a cup of tea and let myself cry, not from weakness, from the particular clarity that comes when 26 years of patience finally arrive somewhere. It was 11:50 p.m. when my phone rang. Arthur. His voice was steady now, the steadiness of a man who had spent the day reading contracts and had reached the end of them. "The board has voted," he said. "They're demanding her resignation. The institutional investors are threatening shareholder suits. The stock is in free fall." I said I was aware. "She wants to come see you," he said. "Tomorrow morning. She asked me to ask." I told him she could come. I sat with that for a long time after he hung up. The cottage was quiet. A lamp on the table. The brass keyring beside my teacup. 26 years. The flickering fluorescent lights. The gray concrete floors. The nights I worked past midnight because the research mattered, because the people doing it mattered, because someone had to make sure the ground they were standing on remained solid. The clock on the mantel showed alas, dos, tres, and umaga. I am 57 years old. I am the owner of a research campus that yesterday belonged, everyone assumed, to someone else. And across the city, in a locked office with a phone ringing off the hook, Victoria Vance sat in the dark, staring at the brass keys on her desk, the keys she had accepted this morning as a formality, as the final small gesture of an overpaid relic being cleared away. "She'll be at my door in about 8 hours. She stood on my porch in the rain. No blazer this time, no carefully arranged confidence. Just a young woman in wet clothes, standing at the door of a cottage she had probably never noticed on any map of things that mattered. I opened the door. I offered her a towel and a cup of tea. She sat at my kitchen table and wept, the kind of crying that has been held back too long and finally finds the only available exit. "Your father was a brilliant man," I said, setting the tea in front of her. "But he forgot that a company's truest value lies in the people who build it, not the buildings that house it." She looked at me like I was still the woman she had gestured toward the exit that morning. Unremarkable, peripheral, already gone. I wasn't. I hadn't been for 26 years. I told her what I was willing to offer. A new framework. A worker-owned cooperative structure. 80% of research profits reinvested into employee benefits and global healthcare initiatives. Her role, administrative director, under genuine oversight, learning what her father never taught her. She signed it without hesitation. Not because she had no choice. Because for the first time that day, something in the room felt like solid ground. Richard used to say I was giving away leverage most people spend their whole lives trying to build. I always thought he meant the land. He meant something larger. He meant the people who hold things quietly, without credit, without recognition, without anyone noticing. Those are the people everything eventually depends on. Arthur retired the following spring. He told me in his last week that pulling the founding charter for that inauguration was the most important thing he had done in 30 years of legal work. Victoria is still at the company. She is learning, slowly, imperfectly, with the particular difficulty of someone unlearning something they were taught to believe was strength. As for me, I still carry the brass keys. The campus still smells like reagent and cold coffee in the early mornings. The floors still creak in the same places they always have. I think about Richard every time I lock the front gate at the end of the day, and I think, true authority is never announced. It is simply present, patient, consistent, and exactly where it needs to be when the moment finally arrives. If you have ever been overlooked by someone who didn't understand what they were standing on, I want to hear your story. Tell me in the comments, and if this story moved you, subscribe. There are more to come.